EQB. So we will start out with meeting announcements and roll call. Hazel, why don't you go ahead and start the recording of the meeting? And we will now go to the Executive Director, Catherine Nuschler, who will call the roll call.
All right, thank you, Chair. Commissioner Arnold.
I am here and everyone is a little wobbly, so I'm going to jump out and jump back in because it's skipping quite a bit. But I'm here and I will be back to see if I can improve my audio quality.
Sounds good. Board Member Bakken.
I am present. I'm having the same concerns, so maybe I'll do the same thing.
Now I'm starting to wonder if it's us on this end, but we'll do our best. I think we'll keep going. Board Member Bauer-Kemper.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay. Looks like everybody's having a little issue, so I'm going to suggest perhaps that when people aren't speaking, I know we'd like to have cameras on, but it might be wise to turn cameras off when you're not speaking. Sometimes that helps a little bit. So Commissioner Cunningham, I believe, could not join us, but Assistant Commissioner Kunis, are you with us from MDH?
I am. Thank you.
Excellent. Chair Davenberger.
Here.
Commissioner Kronval, I don't believe could join us. Double checking. Board Member Hintz. Board Member Katzenberger.
Here.
Commissioner Kessler.
I'm here as well.
Board Member Martin. Right. Commissioner Verilek, hopefully could be here. Do we have Deputy Commissioner McKinnon? Board Member Nelson.
Present.
Commissioner Peterson. I believe Steve Bruce, are you on behalf of Commissioner Peterson?
Yes, I'm here. I think
Thank
he's
you.
at the legislature today.
Yeah. Commissioner Stroman.
I'm here. Thanks.
Chair Holman.
I am here.
And Councilmember Bento.
I'm here.
So, Madam Chair, we have 9, so we do have a quorum. I guess I should circle back. Did I miss anybody? Hopefully not.
Thank you for calling the roll. All right, so then next on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda. And that would be the meeting minutes from the April 17th, 2024 EQB meeting. That's on packet page 5. And then the preliminary agenda for today's May 15th, 2024 EQB meeting, and that's on page 3. So I want to note, though, that the April 17th draft meeting minutes that were included in the packet were revised since the packet was first distributed. The revised meeting minutes were emailed to the board yesterday, as well as posted on the EQB website. And the language was updated on page 2 of the minutes, and which is page 6 of the board packet. And the word coordination was changed to consultation. So it reads, the draft proposes EQB consultation rather than coordination involves the board chair, the executive director, and EQB's tribal relations point of contact. So that's in reference to the tribal consultation policy. So, and that's important distinction here between coordination and consultation. So that needed to be changed. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Madam Chair.
This is Commissioner. Oh, I was going to say, this is Commissioner Kessler. I can make that motion. I'm not sure who was jumping in. They can probably make the second.
This is Peter Bakken. I will second it.
Thank you. We have a motion from Commissioner Kessler and second from Board Member Bakken. Any discussion? Right. All in favor of the consent agenda? Say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. Hearing no opposition, the motion carries and the consent agenda is adopted. So now I will turn it over or back to Catherine Nuschler for the Executive Director's Report.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for joining us today virtually. We did choose to go virtual today due to the end of session, and I know people may be going in and out as the floor session ends and conference committees go forward. So we'll just expect that as it happens. So as I said, it's fully virtual meeting today. As we noted at the beginning, that is being recorded. We do have the meeting chat open and visible. It is visible to everybody, but a reminder that we don't keep that as part of the meeting records. So please use it just for logistical issues. I know we've been discussing the quality of our connection here, which hopefully will hold up at least enough for us to go through the meeting. Board members today, the presenters welcome your questions and feedback, and on a bunch of our information items, I know there will be points where we will have questions for you. So please feel free to mute and unmute yourself and jump in. While it is helpful to have cameras on while you're speaking, we'll see how our bandwidth does, and if that's not feasible to help make sure we can hear you, we might need to minimize cameras. We'll just see. Members of the public, there will be an opportunity to give comment and input during the general comment period at the end of the meeting. You can raise your hand in Teams using the button at the top of your screen, or you can let us know in the chat that you would like to speak. The chair will call on each commenter, and we will then notify you that you can unmute and speak. Please just be patient. Sometimes it takes a second for you to be able to unmute yourself. And then if you need a reminder, the comment procedures will be are on the packet. I am seeing that potentially it's the room at the MPCA. That's the problem. So we'll see if we can fix that during our presentation. I don't have very many announcements. I'll just go ahead. I just came back from a lovely vacation in Ireland with some nice views of the Northern Lights last Friday. So I am still in re-entry mode and figuring out what happened while I was gone. As I noted earlier, we did have the legislative session is wrapping up this week and this weekend. There are 2 bills in conference committee that may impact EQB depending on what pieces are taken from which underlying bill that end up in the final. One is Senate File 4942, the Omnibus Agriculture, Commerce, Energy, Utilities, Environment, and Climate Supplemental Appropriations Bill, which includes some, may potentially include some language about energy permitting, and that would require some changes to 4410. That committee has been meeting this week. The other bill is House File 3911, which is the Environment and Natural Resource Finance Bill. Depending on what goes in there, it could include provisions related to mandatory EIS for feedlots. There's also some language in there about regulatory frameworks for the extraction of non-petroleum gas in Minnesota, which EQB would be involved in to consider environmental review. We'll find out next week what passes, and I'm sure in June we can talk more about what that might mean for us moving forward. The other thing I have is at our last meeting, we discussed presenting the draft tribal coordination and consultation policy to the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. That group is meeting next week, and we are on the agenda for their executive session on Wednesday next week. So I will be going down and presenting that to them and see what kind of feedback we get. So I'm looking forward to that. With that, I will turn it back to the chair, and we'll also see if we can get our internet fixed up here because it seems like maybe we're the problem.
Thank you, Executive Director Nuschler. And as you mentioned, with all the end of session discussions, negotiations, whatnot going on, I might need to jump off this meeting. And I appreciate Commissioner Kessler said she could quite possibly jump over and take on the chair role, but I know she's kind of in the same boat that way too. So I'm hoping to be on for the entire meeting, but see how it goes. But thanks everybody for your patience with that. And before we move on, let me just ask board members, do you have any questions for Executive Director Nuschler? Not hearing any, so why don't we go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda. We have Priscilla Villawatt, Communications and Engagement Coordinator for the EQB, who will present the Environmental Congress Planning Update. Welcome, Priscilla.
Hi, thank you, Chair. My presentation should be loading here shortly. Okay, can everyone see that okay and hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I can hear you. It's still giving a circle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it looks
not
like it's
coming
still
through.
loading for some of us anyway.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, I can just introduce myself. I'm Priscilla Villawatt. I'm our Communications and Engagement Coordinator at EQB. And today I'm going to be sharing some updates about the 2024 Environmental Congress that we have planned for this fall. And hopefully everyone can now see my presentation.
I still can't. It's
Oh, you still can't see it. Okay.
I can see it, so.
I can see it now.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's just on my end. Keep going.
Okay. I'll be sure to read what's on the slides for those of you who are having trouble seeing it. So the outline for today's for my presentation today is I'll be going over current planning that we have in progress for the Congress. I'll be going over location and dates, goals and the format for the Congress, as well as discussion topics and next steps. My ask from the board today is really just any feedback or input that you have in terms of what we're planning or ideas, questions, anything that comes up as the details and plan for the Congress is still currently being developed. So we figured it's a great opportunity for any input or questions that you all have for us. So in terms of current planning, we have just signed a contract with facilitators, so we will be working with the Management Analysis and Development team through the Minnesota Management and Budget Office, who will be helping facilitate the 4 meetings for the Congress. We are working on venue agreements with the Minnesota State and Colleges and Universities. So we'll have all 4 meetings will be at a local community college or state university. We are coordinating dates with the board and key agency staff that are going to be helping at each event. We're also working on just logistics, food, parking, outreach, things like that, and then identifying staff roles and support. So for locations and dates, we will be starting the Congress in Brainerd, Minnesota on Monday, September 23rd. The following day will be in St. Cloud. That's Tuesday, September 24th. Wednesday, September 25th will be in St. Paul, and then we'll end the Congress in Mankato on September 26th. We don't have times nailed down quite yet. We're still trying to finalize some of that with our facilitators, but we are thinking it will be about a 3-hour meeting in the late afternoon or early evening to make sure folks can get home in time for dinner.
Priscilla, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but your slides are not advancing for me here.
Okay. Um,
They
should,
they are out here though. I mean, in my world, I'm seeing them advance.
Okay, so our
Yeah,
folks
I'm
seeing-
currently seeing slide 5.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
okay. Okay. So it sounds like most folks can see them. Okay, but either way, I'll be reading off what's on them for those who are stuck on a different slide who can't see it. I'm so sorry. For the technical issues that we're having today. So this next slide is on goals and format. So a couple of goals that we have for the Environmental Congress this year is really an opportunity for community input of programs and work in the region. We're hoping to engage and connect people regionally on these topics that we'll be discussing at each location, which I'll go into in just a moment. So really engaging and connecting with each other, and then engaging and connecting with state leaders and agency staff and the board. The format for the meetings are going to be really just small group discussions. So we will be limiting attendance to really help make sure that our facilitators can guide discussions that are helpful for both the participants and for state staff and leaders who will be there to kind of hear what community is interested in talking about on those issues. So small group format discussions, and then they will be all in person again for sort of logistical reasons. And we won't be recording them. However, we are being very intentional about doing a report out after the Congress to kind of share what was discussed and the overall takeaways from each event. And then there will be an online opportunity for input for those who cannot come in person, but who still wish to provide some sort of feedback on the questions and discussion topics that we'll be having at each of the events. So in Brainerd, we're focusing on talking about climate resiliency and adaptation. So we're sort of thinking about how are people experiencing climate change and what's happening locally to our environment, and then thinking about how data is helping people understand climate change. These are some topics that came up with the conversations at the Department of Natural Resources, but just keep in mind that all of these topics are still being fleshed out, and they're in a sort of still in a draft phase, but this is sort of the overall topic of conversation for each location. So in St. Cloud, we're thinking about how shifting economies or how economies are shifting in a changing climate. So what is it that people want to imagine for that part of Minnesota? What are their hopes and worries? And then how can state agencies support new economic growth? So again, these conversations are going to be very focused on a very particular topic for that region, because the meeting is so short and because we're really trying to get as much input and feedback from the communities that are in that region. And so we're trying to just get as specific and clear about what questions and discussion topics we want to have at each location. And then in St. Paul, we're going to focus on the climate action framework. It's time for the 2-year update, so it's a great opportunity for us to hear what communities think about the framework, what's working well, and then what environmental actions are needed and missing for those that are most impacted. So really thinking about an environmental justice perspective as well here. And then in Mankato, several state agencies around reducing water pollution and thinking about how can data and information be used to best show water quality progress. And then how do we increase adoption of mitigation strategies as well. And then just in terms of next steps, we're focused on finalizing or really working on the agenda. So working with the with MMB to develop frameworks for the agenda. So the idea is that each meeting will have a very similar framework, but the discussion that are being had at each meeting will vary based on the topics. So working on identifying presenters as well, and then continuing discussing with agency leaders and the board on refining those topics. In terms of outreach, we're also going to be reaching out to many of you about partners and other folks in the community who we'd like to invite to the meeting, and then connecting with agency communications teams, again, to support and outreach and promotion, to making sure that we get the announcement out there and can invite people to the events. And then in terms of logistics, like I said earlier, we're thinking about food and catering. We're planning for an inclusive event. So being very intentional about some of those logistics. And then thinking about post-meeting planning. So thinking again about that outreach that we'll be doing after the meeting, and report out about what was discussed and sort of the outcomes of the meeting. So yeah, that is what we have coming up, and I believe that'll be it for me. So thank you so much for allowing us to share the updates today, and I'm open to any questions or feedback that the board might have.
Well, thank you, Priscilla, for that update and all your work to get this organized and planned for us. Why don't I just pause and see what questions or comments board members have at this point for Priscilla? Raise your hand or just jump in.
I have a question, I guess. I know that each area would be benefited or ideally staffed with people from the board. How are you going to solicit participation in those geographic areas, or have you thought about that?
From the board specifically? Yeah, so we have started to reach out to some of your offices and to the public board members as well, to try and group board members in each region. So we'll have like 3 or 4 board members, so agency commissioners and public board members at each of the meetings. And so if you haven't gotten an email, you should be getting an email very soon about which dates and locations we'll be inviting each of you to attend. And that's mostly based on, so for public board members, it's the regional, like what congressional district they're in. And for agencies, staff, and commissioners, that will be mostly based on the topics that are being discussed at each event.
Thanks, Priscilla. As I know, my executive admin mentioned that you have reached out to her, so she's working to get my location scheduled for that, and I'm looking forward to it. Any other questions or comments from board members? All right, I'm not hearing any, so we'll go ahead and move on. But thank you again, Priscilla, for that update and all the work on this. So next on the agenda, we have Laura Lyons, Energy Information Planning Specialist from the Minnesota Department of Commerce, and she'll present an update on the draft State Energy Policy and Conservation Quadrennial Report. So Laura, are you ready to jump in here?
Whoa, give me 1 second.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, and I see the front slide of your PowerPoint.
Awesome. There was a very strange buzzing in my headset, so we had to do some quick fixes there. Everyone can see the PowerPoint okay. Giving it 30 seconds to see if there's a big hustle saying people can't, but with nothing bad. Okay, I'll jump into it. Yes, board members, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Laura Lyons, and I'm a member of the Division of Energy Resources at the Minnesota Department of Commerce, here to, like you said, talk about the State Energy Policy and Conservation Report. So before jumping into that, I just wanted to highlight very briefly what the Department of Commerce does, because it touches a lot of facets and I didn't know a lot of this when I started here. So might provide some good context. So Minnesota's Department of Commerce is pretty broad reaching and helps regulate a variety of entities, from the gas stations that we fill our vehicles up on, regulates banks around Minnesota that we all interact with on daily, weekly, or various basis. We help in the energy sector that we'll dive more into for the rest of this presentation. And we also are involved with insurance. So be it a hailstorm, anything like that, we help regulate those insurance people. So I have more about our mission and strategic priorities in here if people have questions about that, but we don't have much time. So I will dive into the brunt of the report instead. So the State Energy Policy and Conservation Report is mandated in Minnesota State Statute Section 216C.18. It is a report that goes to the Minnesota legislature every 4 years. So that is where the kind of shorter name comes from. We call it the Quadrennial Energy Report, or the Quad Report. That's what you'll hear me refer to it as for the rest of the presentation. And it is the main audience are legislators and energy leaders and policy leaders. It covers a broad array of energy related topics. I have a short list here, and then the next slide get more into what all is involved in the report. But for right now, just kind of wanted to provide a high level overview that the Quad Report is kind of a snapshot in time of where we are at in Minnesota in this given moment in the energy sector, as well as progress and changes that have happened in Minnesota since the last report was released about 4 years ago. Also want to highlight what the report is not. It does not specifically drive our policy and legislative agenda. There are recommendations in it on various different energy topics, but it's more of kind of an update for the legislature and other policymakers about where we are at a given time, kind of like an energy cliff notes, so to speak, so that those policymakers can make informed decisions. And yeah, we wanted to highlight that the report does not supersede any sort of standard policy and statute update efforts that each agency has, and that each of our partner agencies had along the way. So some topics that are included in the 2024 Quad Report. As you can imagine, the energy sector in Minnesota is very vast, so there are quite a number of topics. We have had over 50 contributing authors and reviewers at this point on this report. It has been a huge group effort. So this is just a high-level overview of the topics that are included. If you have a favorite energy topic that you don't see listed here, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not in the report. So just to dive into some of these, and the order of these bullets does not necessitate the importance of any of one of these given topics. It's just kind of how it fleshed out. So we go through progress towards different standards. We want to highlight that while we are very stoked about the carbon-free by 2040 standard, there is not a lot of requirements for how that standard is being measured yet. So in the 2024 Quad Report, we direct people to the docket where the Public Utilities Commission is discussing how to measure that progress right now. And we anticipate a lot more updates in the 2028 Quad on that particular standard. The renewable and solar electricity standards have been around a lot longer, so there's more updates about our progress towards those. We talk about energy policies and programs that have passed in the state and federal level since 2020. talk about community and business and tribal initiatives in the energy realm. We hit utility rates, rate design, all kind of fancy words for how much Minnesotans are paying for our energy right now. We talk about where energy resources are being sited or located and how the transmission route planning is going, both for pipelines and electricity transmission lines. We get into energy reliability and security, you know, what are we doing to make sure that our lights stay on, that our refrigerators stay on? That's a big one. And power generation, or how our power is made, is also a big topic in here. We highlight which things are trending up, which ones are trending down, which have been kind of steady, as well as there's a number of emerging technologies like hydrogen and energy storage that we have a small bit of right now, but we're anticipating seeing growth between now and the next quad report. So we talk about those for a little bit. And then we also get into energy consumption, which is just how are we using that energy once it's been made. The building sector, transportation sector, and the public water use sector are all three big ones that we highlight what they're currently doing around conservation and various different energy use efforts there. And as the name of the report implies with the policy and conservation report, conservation is a large part of it as well, talking about optimization. What are we doing to make energy affordable for all Minnesotans, and weatherization too, which is making sure that our homes can stay warm in the winter and cold in the summer without all of us paying an arm and a leg for it. And another thing I want to highlight here is that this report is not all inclusive of every single facet that's happening in the energy sector in this exact moment. An easy example is that last year when the cannabis bill got passed, Department of Agriculture and Department of Commerce were tasked with setting energy standards for cannabis growers. Those conversations are very much still ongoing and trying to figure out what that even looks like. So different topics like that have just kind of sprung up aren't included in this particular report, but we anticipate there'll be a lot more to talk about in the next one. On a similar note, I'm sure everyone has heard that 2023 was a huge year for energy legislation in Minnesota. And this is just a smattering of the programs that were funded and established. And Commerce has been working like crazy to get these all up and rolling. And while we do include quite a number of these in the report, I just want to caveat that if you have your favorite individual rebate that you're so excited to see, and if it's not, mentioned in a ton of detail in the report, it's probably that we had to kind of balance staff members' time, right? Time that they could spend continuing to get that program rolling, or time that they had to pause and say, as of February, this is where I was at. So if you don't see your specific thing that you're super stoked about, it might be that person is working super hard getting it rolling. So just wanted to highlight that for people that we're having to balance a lot of workload, as I'm sure everyone's agencies are. I would be remiss not to mention all of the collaborating entities and agencies that have helped us thus far. We have Department of Administration, Transportation, Pollution Control Agency, and the Public Utilities Commission, as well as a number of outside organizations who have helped draft content, helped with figures, helped with data, reviewing things. Everyone just really working really well together, trying to make a well-rounded picture of where is energy at right now in Minnesota. So with all that background, a little bit about where our timeline is at with this report. Staff and supervisors have been, again, drafting that content and figures, pulling together data since about January of this year. Right now, the report is under leadership review, and there are a couple different tasks that are required in statute for us to complete. One of them is a public meeting about the draft report. So that is currently scheduled for Wednesday, June 12th from 9 to 10 a.m. And I have a link to that later on in these slides for anyone who's interested in that meeting. The statute also requires that we provide a draft version of the report to EQB members. So that is partially why I'm here today. Working with all your staff members, they figured it would be a good idea to give kind of an update about what is this quad report and why is it showing up in your inbox. We're anticipating sending that to everyone in June and don't have an exact date on that yet, but we'll keep you posted and we'll keep all the staff members posted. And the final due date then for sending it to the legislature is July 1st. So that is the date we are rapidly working our way towards. And we also just wanted to mention that the 2024 quad report that gets finalized in July, it will be in a PDF format. It is also available to print. If anyone would like a printed copy, please just feel free to reach out and we will coordinate with you to get you a printed copy. And as I think a lot of state agencies right now are working on trying to find ways to make data more accessible, and which obviously PDF are not the most accessible. So once this lift is done, we're going to be working on finding ways to kind of transfer incrementally pieces of the quad report onto Commerce's website so that ideally in the future that data will be more accessible. It will be able to be found by a search engine a little bit easier. And ideally, a big thing with the quad is that on July 1st, when it's done, it becomes kind of a static image. And once it's online, it's something that we could more routinely have updated. So that is much more helpful to all of our policymakers to have a graph that they can see got updated on X date versus just having everything as of July 1st, 2024. So we're hoping to tweak the statute language a little bit in the years going forward so that the 2028 version might look a little bit different than the 2024 version. And with that, I have the link here again for that public meeting information, Wednesday, June 12th, 9 to 10. People can request the slides or feel free to just reach out to me for that registration information. I want to say thanks again to you all for having me and for the EQB staff for getting us here. And I don't have an ask from the board at this time, but just wanted to kind of give you the opportunity to ask any questions.
Well, thank you, Laura. I really appreciate the update on how things are going with the draft report, and we'll look forward to the draft report coming out to us soon. I pause here though, see what other board members have for questions or comments. Raise your hand or just jump in.
Radio silence.
I'm not hearing anything. And, maybe when we do get the report, there will be questions from folks who could reach out to you at that time.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Laura,
Well, really-
I have one question.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
this is Commissioner Arnold. Just so that you can have one question. Can you talk a little bit about how this relates to the greenhouse gas report that MPCA and Commerce collaborate on? I think every other year.
Yes. Yeah. So the greenhouse gas report, the next one will be reporting on calendar year 2022, being released by MPCA January 2025. So one of our kind of statute updates in chapter 1 of the report describes kind of the cycle of those coming out and the results of the 2020 report. And then we also just get into a little bit of energy specific greenhouse gas numbers because we have more recent numbers about those than we do about the entire Minnesota state. So we reference it, but yeah, they're two different cycles, so it gets kind of messy.
Good to know. All right, I'm going to pause again. Any other questions or comments? Well, again, thank you, Laura, for the update and your work on the quadrennial report.
Thank you.
Why don't we go ahead then and move on the agenda? And the next item is our pollinator action implementation plan. So I think we have Rebecca here. Yep. Go ahead, Rebecca. She's going to present the state pollinator coordinator as our state pollinator coordinator for EQB. Good to see you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me and see the slide that I'm sharing?
I can hear you and I can see your
Great.
first slide.
Wonderful. Thank you. I was nervous about that little snafus that we've been having. Thank you again, Chair, and good afternoon, members of the board and the public. My name is Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno, and I am the State Pollinator Coordinator with the Environmental Quality Board. And today I'm here on behalf of the, oops, I think I'm doing something there weird. Okay, I'm back. I'm here on behalf of the Interagency Pollinator Protection Team, or IPPT for short, to talk to you and bring you an update about the implementation of the Pollinator Action Framework and the draft outline of the 2024 Pollinator Report. See. Okay, next slide. Good. So in this presentation, I will give you a brief background of why we're doing this work, how this came about. Then I will talk about the implementation of the Pollinator Action Framework, what's the process that we're doing to work on this. Then I will show you the draft outline of the 2024 Pollinator Report. And finally, I will show you our timeline and our next steps. So for today, the IPPT would like the board to provide feedback on two main items. The first one is the implementation of the Pollinator Action Framework, and the second is the outline of the Pollinator Report. For this, I divided the presentation in two. In the first section, I will talk about the Action Framework implementation, and then I will pause and give the board time to discuss this item specifically. I will have a couple prompting questions for facilitating the discussion and having, being able to answer any questions the board may have about this. Then I will proceed to talk about the outline of the Pollinator Report, and then again have another time for board discussion specifically about that draft outline. So basically our ask for today is board feedback on these two. So why do we care about pollinators? And again, pollinators are essential for the security of our food systems, for the ecosystems, the way they are, the food chains. They provide innumerable services for our world. And we know that there are about 200,000 pollinator species in the world, and the majority of these are insects. And this means that there's a wide diversity of pollinator species that we know some may be doing okay right now, but we know a lot of them are in danger and are being threatened. And some of the main threats that we know of are the loss and fragmentation of habitat, pesticides, diseases and parasites, and climate change. And because Minnesota cares about pollinators, in 2019, the governor signed the Executive Order 1928, which directed the Environmental Quality Board to convene the Interagency Pollinator Protection Team to ensure interagency collaboration. This executive order also outlined our pollinator protection goals, and it directed the IPPT to report on progress to the EQB by December 1st of each year. So as part of these efforts, the IPPT developed in 2019 scorecards to keep track of progress. These scorecards, the team identified metrics and indicators for each one of the goals of the pollinator protection goals. And we're using the scorecards to inform the board and the public on our progress toward our goals. In 2021, the IPPT decided that we were going to give we were going to be updating these scorecards every 3 years to allow time to actually see trend differences and status. 2024, this year, is the year that we need to update the scorecards, and we're also going to take this opportunity to make sure that the scorecards are connected now to the Pollinator Action Framework. And the Pollinator Action Framework, the board approved this framework last year. And the purpose of this is to guide the strategic alignment of resources, policies, and programs to help Minnesota's pollinators. During the development process of this framework, we included broad and direct public engagement strategies to make sure that we were including expertise from outside state agencies, but also voices from the public, from people interested and people that are working for pollinator protection in the ground as well. The action framework was structured by each one of our pollinator protection goals and our desired outcome. And each goal has categories, subcategories, and then actions. Furthermore, the actions are also classified in 3 different sections. So some actions are classified on lead, which means that actions, those actions are led or may be led by state agencies. Other actions are under enact, which means that they will require state legislature to write laws or allocate funds. And the last classification was encourage, which means are actions the state can encourage others to do. So now I'm going to be talking about the work that we've been doing this year, the team has been doing to prioritize the actions in the Pollinator Action Framework. We have 2 main prioritization criteria, impact and effort, and I will be talking about the components of each one of these criteria to you so you have a better understanding of how we're doing this process and you can better provide feedback on it. So we have the criteria of impact. We took this, we kind of adapted this concept from the Impact Compass developed by Stanford Business, but we adapted it to our conservation goals. And here we have 5 main components. But before I go into the components, just wanted to make sure that it's clear, for impact and effort. So the impact is the potential impact that an action may have on each one of those goals. And then the effort is basically what it would take for us to implement that action. So for impact, the rating is from 1 to 5. So based on the components that they have, and each one of those components are rated from 1, will have a rating of 0 or 1. So the overall score for impact will be either 1 or 5. And then for effort, we have 4 components. And so the rating will be from 1 to 4. And I will explain each one of these components right now. So for impact, we have magnitude, which means that an action can have statewide reach. So if an action in the Pollinator Action Framework has potential for statewide reach, that action will have a rating of 1 in magnitude. Then rare or specialist, this one is specifically talking about the focus on that action having a specific impact on rare or specialist species of pollinators or their habitat. So for example, if an action benefits directly an endangered species or their habitat, then that action will have a score here of 1 for this component. Then we have efficacy. Efficacy is proven results. So for example, if that action has had already a successful pilot program or a successful program that has been previously been implemented that can kind of tell us that there is potential success for the implementation of this action. If it does, then it will have a 1, and if it doesn't, it will have a 0. Scalability means that it's an action that can be expanded beyond a single project. So some of the actions in the action framework are broad and others are very narrow. For those that are broad, there is room for different projects to be included under them. So if we can have that room of scalability, then that action will have a 1 or it will have a 0. And then finally, mission, which means that this action may align more directly or more closely to our overall mission for pollinator protection. So for effort, we have 4. Again, we have readiness, which means that if an action has no existing programs prior, no successful pilot programs, there has nothing, it's a completely original idea for action, this will have a score of 1. So it will be harder, it will require a higher effort to implement. So it will have a 1. Then we have capacity. Capacity means that current staff or resource level is either not adequate to implement yet, or it will require increase capacity. And if that is the case, it will have a 1. Legislative effort, it means that this action will require us to either write a project proposal for the legislature or budget proposal, etc. So if it does, it will have a 1. So it will have higher effort. And then finally, lead versus encourage. So if it's an action that will require state agencies to lead, that will be required to state agencies to lead this effort, then it will have a 1. If it's an action that we will be encouraging others to do, it will be a 0. This will be a little more clear in the next slide, because once we have these ratings, we can then kind of plot the actions in a graph like this. This is for illustration purposes. And then those actions will fall in one of these quadrants. So for example, if an action has high impact and it requires a low effort, it has a low effort score, then it will be a quick win. But if the action is, again, has high impact potential, a high impact score, but also has a high effort score, then it will be a major project. That means that it will require more resources to be implemented. Again, we will then identify based on these scores where the actions will be classified under, and based on this, we hope this will be helpful for state agencies to prioritize what actions are more ready to be implemented and when. And this work right now of rating impact and effort is being done currently by state agencies. So each agency is looking at the action framework matrix, looking at the actions that are led by state agencies, seeing if their agency has a role in the implementation of that action, and then rating these components accordingly to their own capacity and knowledge. Once this is done, the IBPT gets together and we have a couple workshops where we will see where it falls for each one of these agencies, where there's room for collaboration, room for leveraging each other's capacity, and seeing where we can optimize our resources as well. So I'm connecting this again to bringing back the scorecards, because also this process will help us identify certain actions that will give us data or metrics that will help us identify metrics and indicators to then update the scorecards accordingly. And then for future reports, this will be our main tool of reporting how we're doing in the implementation of the action framework, and also, consequently working toward our pollinator protection goals. Now, I would like to give the board a little time for discussion to provide feedback on this process. And I have a few prompting questions here, to guide the discussion. Do you think that the prioritization criteria are appropriate and sufficient? Are there additional or different criteria that should be considered? And what should agencies consider as they identify ways to collaborate and align directions? Madam Chair, I would like to now give the word to you, if you would like to guide that.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca, for going through all that, and appreciate the prompting questions here. So I'd love to hear from board members on the pollinator action framework. So why don't we see who would like to go ahead and raise your hand, or just jump in with any thoughts about the prioritization criteria, any other criteria, and what agencies should be thinking about as we're aligning our work with these actions. So I will pause and see who's ready to jump in and provide some thoughts.
We also accept compliments. Just kidding.
That's right. That's right. I will go to Commissioner Stroman, and then Board Member Nelson raised his hand. Go ahead, Commissioner Stroman.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to raise my hand the old-fashioned way because I was not quickly finding any other means. I just want to say, Madam Chair and Rebecca, I think the criteria makes sense to me, how we would approach, prioritization of actions. I think it is very consistent with how DNR would approach, our agency's work on pollinators as well as other things, right? We want to maximize impact and we want to minimize effort, where we can. And it's not that we should discount things that take more effort, if the impact is important. But I find it very consistent with,
Commissioner Sturman, I can't hear
You're
you.
on mute. I think you're still talking. Unmute.
Sorry. Sometimes my computer has a life of its own and it just likes to hit mute or camera. No, I was just finishing to say, I do find it useful to find those things, right, that are quick wins versus those things that are going to take longer time investment, because we do need to do both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroman. And let's go to Board Member Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, compliments. This is well thought out, so I appreciate that. Had a couple questions. So an action scores one scores a 5 and one scores an 8. What does that mean? I guess. Then I have a few other things. But
Yeah, so let's say that I can go back a couple slides so that we can see that more clearly. Give me 1 second and we'll organize. Look, that's not the place. So let's say here that, we see here that the impact has all these components. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So impact has 5 components. That's why it's 1 to 5. And effort has 4 components. So we thought that these were the components that we needed to do a fair scoring of the potential impact and the potential effort that it will take to implement an action. So that's the meaning of the score. If you as board or as experts in your own, areas think that in effort, there's another component that we're not considering, we're forgetting we're missing, we'll be willing to hear it and see, if it fits within, the nature of the work that this takes. And then we will then have another component for effort, and both will have a rating from 1 to 5, let's say. So that's basically one of the things that we want to hear from you if you, consider that these are sufficient for doing this rating. Once, this rating is useful for us to then be able to plot the actions and kind of see where they fall within this graph and identify which ones will require, will be major projects because they will require more effort, but I still have high impact, so they're worth doing, or which ones are, maybe something that we can get the ball rolling already because we already have the capacity and we know they have high impact. And then we have the other 2, which are fill-ins and thankless tasks. And we haven't found any fill-ins or thankless tasks so far. I want to sneak peek on our results yet. And I think it's because when we were developing the pollinator action framework, we kind of we're prioritizing actions that we knew were going to have high impact. And that's why, I think it's probably not going to find any thankless tasks on the action framework because we're considering actions that we think are going to make a change for pollinators. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly, if that's good.
Thank you. I think I've got it with this slide here. I do have a couple follow-up, Madam Chair, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Board Member Nelson.
One thing to consider in effort might be, and I think this and my following comment both revolve around this, that I looked it up once, that if you're looking at the habitat issue, that within Minnesota, I think 70-some% of the land is privately owned. So that's a majority of the land. And so one of the effort things to think about is a criteria called acceptability, whether that action has you may not actually have that knowledge, but whether it's acceptable to the public on their private land. That may also fall under capacity to it. It kind of could be a subset of capacity. And then my last thought along this line, I'm a little concerned with the criteria that you have for lead versus encourage you said lead would get 1 point and encourage maybe a 0 point. But it seems to me that the encouraged ones would be most of those that involve private land where there is 77% of the land. So that would tend to, and maybe this is the intent.
You're on mute, Board Member Nelson. Just went on mute.
Maybe there was a timing issue. I'm talking too long. Sorry, Madam Chair. So maybe the intent is, you know, this is for state agencies, and so leading is easier than encouraging in some ways. Although I spent my career encouraging farmers to do conservation, and if you do it right, it's actually pretty productive. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. Just to clarify, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, you go right ahead.
Yeah, so for the lead and encourage, we were actually thinking the lead was going to take higher effort than the encouraging, because it would require more resources on the side of state agencies to lead an effort and to, I'm sorry, being redundant, to lead an action. It would require higher effort than us spending resources on encouraging. But I guess there's a good point on like, how hard are we encouraging? What are the means we're using for encouraging certain actions? So that's definitely a consideration I'll bring back to the team to discuss, because it's an interesting, concept and a way of thinking it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Others? Rebecca, I'm not hearing anything more at this point, but I think you have a little more you were going to prompt us with, right?
Correct, Madam Chair. Thank you. So our next section is going to be a shorter one. I will be talking about our draft outline of the 2024 pollinator report for this year. So this is it. This is the slide. These are the sections we are thinking of including in this year's report. We will have a chart, why we're doing this, an introduction of what's new in this report, what is this about, a call to action for everyone who reads it, new findings. This would be a new section this year where we want to bring kind of like new research results and findings from research that is specifically about pollinators, habitat, impact of pesticides, etc. So this is a new section that we want to bring this new information to the board and the public. And then we'll also have a section on state agency action highlights of the year. So what actions we've been implementing or carrying out this year. And then the bulk of the report will be on the implementation of the Pollinator Action Framework. We will have the new scorecards and language on the development of this part. And then in the appendix, we will include the full matrix for each goal with the scores, the prioritization criteria, and the scores that we gave each one of them for full transparency. So basically, that's the outline. And now I want to give, some time for the board. If you think there's additional information that you would like to hear on our progress toward our pollinator protection goals that you would like to be included in this year's report.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. And maybe I could ask a question too, if you go back one slide for the outline of the report. I don't recall if you said it, but work to date that could be captured just as an update. Is that part of any of these items of the report?
You mean a section on work to date, like would we call work to date? I think that's kind of captured in the action highlights. So the action highlights, we've used them in the past reports too, where we are highlighting specific, like, numbers or results on actions that for each state agency that have been doing in the past year. Some are from programs that have been ongoing. Others are like, programs maybe are ending, but these are the end results. And others are like, we're projecting to collaborate with these people, with this organization. So that's kind of where we're planning to include that. But yeah, I don't know if that's what you meant.
Yes, that is exactly what I meant. And thank you. I just wanted to make sure that that would capture some of what's been done to date and planned for moving forward too. So thanks.
Mm-hmm.
What other thoughts or questions do the board members have on this outline? What else they'd want to see in the report, or any questions they have for Rebecca about what's going into the report? Becca, I am not seeing anything at the moment here.
Sounds good. I just have 2 more slides, Madam Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about our timeline, just to make it a visual here. We're May, we're getting feedback from the board, and then we will go back and work on continuing the prioritization of the action framework, on working on the language for the report. We want to bring to our agency leadership in September a draft of the report that will include all these components. And I also want to encourage public board members, if they would be interested in seeing, those materials, and provide further feedback as well. I will send you all an email in September, and you can let me know if you would like a one-on-one meeting where we could discuss those materials. And then the final board review and consideration for approval for the report is planned for the November meeting, to be able to publish all of this by December 1st. So basically, this is just in writing these next steps of what we will be doing in the next upcoming months. Thank you very much. And if you have any other questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Rebecca. And board members, I'm sure you can go ahead and reach out to Rebecca with any further thoughts on the outline of the report, the criteria, after thinking through this today. And I'll pause one more time for any further comments or questions. All right. Well, thank you again, Rebecca. Appreciate all your work on it. Okay, then the next item on the agenda is the mandatory categories report for feedback in the plan and outline. And we have Kayla Walsh, our environmental review program administrator for EQB, and she'll present the mandatory categories report. So Kayla, go right ahead. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully my slide is presenting correctly and everybody can hear me.
I can hear you and I can see your slide.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Kayla Walsh, and I work for the Environmental Quality Board in our environmental review program. So today I am here to share an update on the report called the Mandatory Category Report. And that's something that our team publishes every 3 years. Mandatory categories are in our rules. So the categories detail when certain projects are required to do an environmental assessment worksheet or an environmental impact statement. And each mandatory category also has certain thresholds and rule that tell us when the review is required. So each category assigns a responsible governmental unit who would then be responsible for preparing and approving environmental review documents. And to give you a example of the scale of the 60 categories, they're very wide ranging. So they can include transmission lines, natural areas, feedlots, and water appropriations. So it's a wide variety of categories that are listed in our rule. So one reason that we pull together this mandatory category report is because it is legislatively required. So statute tasks the EQB with publishing this report every 3 years. So it also directs us to work with the Departments of Transportation, Natural Resources, and the Pollution Control Agency to help pull together information and author the report. So for each category, the statute asks us to describe the intended historical purpose, which includes explaining why the category is here and why it is measured in this way. It also asks us to include whether projects that fall into a mandatory category might also need local, state, or federal permits. And lastly, it asks us to analyze recommendations for whether each mandatory category could be modified, eliminated, or unchanged. And this legislative charge was enacted in 2018. So we have reports that use these baseline requirements from the years 2018, 2021, and now the next one is due December 1st, 2024 this year. So we do the report because it's legislatively required, but we also do it because it provides a great state of the state of mandatory categories, which are a big part of our program. It provides information about how those categories are being used, and it documents potential recommendations for changes or identification of areas where further evaluation might be needed. So the evaluation of each category really helps EQB identify updates that we can make so the program can be more efficient and reflect evolving science. And because our environmental review team is doing this report sort of on the heels of building our continuous improvement process, we're also bringing that growth mindset to this report. So we're thinking about how do we improve this report to make it a little more user-friendly and make it work for us so that it's not just sitting on a shelf. We hope that it is really easy to navigate and maybe even in a web-based platform. So we want it to be easily referenced by responsible governmental units, practitioners, project proposers, members of the public, really anyone who interacts with our program. So with that in mind, here are our goals for this upcoming version of the report. So we will describe the histories of each category a little more so than has been done in past reports. We'll be identifying any new project types that might require a new mandatory category. And lastly, the report will also discuss any issues and identify any pathways for making updates to the mandatory categories. So to help us meet those goals, we did some public engagement. And that's different than what's happened in the past for this report. In the past, EQB has worked with state and local governmental units and asked them for information, but we've tried to cast a bit of a wider net this time around for feedback because we feel like it helps us identify issues from multiple perspectives. We feel like doing a broad outreach aligns with the draft strategic plan and with the intentions of MEPA, the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act. So we broadened our engagement to get a feeling for how the mandatory categories look and feel and operate, not only to practitioners and RGUs, but also to the public and anyone who interacts with our program. And so a full documentation of that engagement process can be found in the board packet, page 8, where the memo begins. And that memo goes into a lot more detail, but my big takeaway is that folks across Minnesota care very much about their environment, and they're very invested in the environmental review program. And so this is a bit of a summary of the feedback that we heard. We did ask questions in the Engagement HQ online platform, which is what Engagement HQ is referencing on this slide. So we asked, are there any projects that you think potentially should receive an environmental review via a mandatory category, but those projects are not currently covered by a mandatory category? We also sent out a survey And that survey asked many more detailed questions per category about changes that could happen per category. And I just want to note that out of the survey respondents, we were able to know that about a third of them were local governmental units. The survey is really the only medium where we could ask participants to self-identify their demographics. So that's why we're able to identify 1/3 of respondents there were LGUs. We also received many emails and we hosted 2 listening sessions. So we had the number of participants you can see on the screen here, but of those 56 attendees at the listening session, not all of them were there to contribute. They were also there to listen, EQB members and tech reps. And then of those participants, we received about 705 substantive comments. So that's 680 in written format and an additional 25 verbal comments during listening sessions. And I think the amount of feedback that we've received, again, is very unique to this iteration of the report, but it's been really helpful to find some alignment between what we're hearing from both practitioners, RGUs, and the public where that alignment exists. So I've gone through and analyzed all of the different comments, and I've themed them based on topic area, which you can see in the memo. But since this is not a required comment period for the report, we're not going to be responding to each individual comment, but we will be summarizing the ideas that we've received so far. And so for example, we heard from a lot of people that they would like to see thresholds updated for a certain category. So then we can plan to discuss that and the pros and the cons of that in the report per category. So we're aiming to address all of the summarized topics from these comments so that comments will show up in some way in the report, but we're not going to be responding to each comment individually. And we are, oh, there we go. I just want to say that we are really grateful to everybody who has engaged with us so far on this report. And it's been very helpful to see certain issues from multiple perspectives, and it helps us to summarize concerns and suggest pathways to move forward. And that feedback was really extensive, and in some cases, it did go beyond the scope of the mandatory category report. So in those circumstances, we can discuss those ideas in other EQB work products. For example, maybe addressing problems in the water report or elsewhere, but it's my hope that almost all of the comments pertaining to changes to mandatory categories directly should be reflected in the report. And so engagement, as you can see, is really only one part of this process phase that I have up on the screen here. So first off, we want to review and engage, and that engagement memo is one part of that review and engage portion. Right now, we're in between this reviewing information and past reports and starting to draft, and then publishing the report again will happen in December. That's a very high level overview of the process. There we go. So in addition to the public outreach that's described in the memo, I'm also considering review of issues that have been identified by past reports, piecing together some histories through SONAR's statements of need and reasonableness, and SONAR's tell us the reasoning behind past rule changes. I'm also coordinating or incorporating our data on the number of reviews completed per category in the last 3 years since the previous report. And if you recall back to our continuous improvement process, at that time, we also siphoned off some ideas that were pertaining to mandatory category changes, and we identified those to address them in this report. So I'm also incorporating those ideas here. And then lastly, I asked our tech reps to fill out some forms to share their impressions on the categories for which their agencies could be RGUs. And I also received some really great suggestions from tech reps. So we're working through those too. So a lot is going into this review portion. And we're only just starting to draft the report, but each category would include identifying issues we've heard, explaining some of the options for improvements if they're necessary, and then where changes might be needed to a category, we can also identify the path needed to make that change. So we might need to clarify terminology or interpretations, and that could happen in guidance, or it could mean that certain changes would require rulemaking. There are simple rulemaking changes like definition updates or aligning our terminology with other rules. Or we might need to do a bigger change, like a threshold change, or adding a project type. And those bigger types of changes, really any changes, would just be discussed in this report. I don't think it's going to say that EQB has to make those changes or is committing to make those changes. We're definitely not wanting to prioritize anything, but thinking about it more as laying the groundwork, laying out a menu of options so that we can think about how to pursue updating categories based on the information that we're hearing now and doing that in the future. So I also think the report should hopefully do a good job of documenting these topics of conversation so that they don't get lost throughout time, so that we can refer back to them in the future, and we have a good tracking of conversations across time. And of course, the drafting is been very iterative, and we're sharing everything for review so that our writing team can review it first. So that's the co-authoring agencies that we're meeting with on a regular basis and relying on their agency's expertise to help guide the recommendations that we're formulating. And we're aiming to share a report with the board, a draft report, before the end of summer. And here is what I am imagining the outline of the full report to look like. So we'll have the introduction, overview, and methodology. And then we have the real bread and butter, the mandatory category analysis. And again, that's every category will discuss its past history, potential permits that might apply to projects in that category, and then list what EQB is hearing and recommend any updates based on what we're hearing or based on past experience. And then I'm also thinking that there would likely be a discussion section on programmatic changes. So for example, and programmatic specific to the mandatory categories and how they're implemented. But we received a lot of comments related to overarching things like including environmental justice areas or health impact statements for environmental impact statements. So I think that's an example of where it would be a good place to document that discussion. And, you know, these are all still in development, so the discussion points are really to be determined, but we did get a lot of feedback that I think could be considered beyond the scope of just the mandatory categories themselves, what projects are reviewed at what sizes. And so having the section would be a great place to document that discussion for those types of overarching issues that might apply to more than one mandatory category. All right, and so these are the touch points for sharing out the report. We hope to share a draft with the board this summer again, and then put it out for broader feedback in the fall. Eventually, we will publish the report December 1st, so that means that the board would need to approve the report before we publish it, so that would take place in November board meeting if possible. So then it'll be sent to the legislature on time on December 1st. All right, and so this timeline slide, I'm not going to go through it per se, but I think that it would be a good reference back in the future after my presentation. It's really repetitive of what I've already shared, but I'm including it here just in case you would like all of the timeline in one spot to go back and reference in the future. So anything above the dates are really things that EQB staff and tech reps are working toward, and anything below the dates are the touch points with the public or the board. And then this arrow here underneath is meant to indicate that we are meeting very regularly with the co-authoring agencies and our tech reps from those agencies so that we can really go through and better understand the engagement and the past recommendations so that we can be reactive to that and formulate some good recommendations for the report. So what's immediately up next for the report? EQB and MnDOT and PCA and DNR and any other tech reps who wish to attend will be drafting each category, and we're all aiming to share that draft report with the board this summer. Recommendations are going to, again, center on some changes that will, recommendations will probably be phrased as evaluating things to move forward in order to make the environmental review program more effective and aligned with our effectiveness criteria. So how do we provide clarity, efficiency, scientific integrity in the categories? And EQB staff, we really, again, want to recognize and appreciate the thoughtful involvement of the public and of environmental review practitioners in the process so far. And I definitely look forward to future discussions and learnings. We're sifting through a lot of detailed information right now, again, on a wide variety of projects. So it's been really helpful to be able to call on individuals' expertise across our different member agencies. So we are working to formulate recommendations, and those will be based on, again, the engagement, the history, and our GU expertise. So thank you very much for allowing me to share that update with you today. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them.
All right, thank you, Kayla, for that update. Talking through what will be in the draft report. So it sounds like we'll see, the EQB members will see a draft report around July, end of July. Did I catch that right?
That's the hope, yep.
Okay, cool. All right. What questions or comments do folks have? Go ahead and raise your hand. Go ahead, Commissioner Kessler.
Thanks, Commissioner Davenberger, and thank you, Kayla. This is an impressive effort, and I think it's awesome that you have so much interest and harnessing this energy around this topic. I'm kind of curious how you anticipate following up with these folks. Is it just that there will be some sort of section in the report that summarizes comments and how comments were considered? Or do you anticipate you'll have some more public-facing webinars or opportunities to discuss how comments were considered? I just, recognizing that 680 substantive comments were considered is means that there are people who care a lot about this, and making sure that we continue to keep them engaged in our work. Curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's something that we're also caring a lot about and trying to figure out the best way to do that and to continue that meaningful engagement and feedback. So in the fall, we definitely want to put out a draft for the public to comment and see if they can see their comments reflected back to them in that version of the report. And a lot of them were very detailed. And so I think that that's been really helpful for us to begin to evaluate the need for changes and changes in thresholds specifically. And so I don't think that we have the time to have those very detailed scoping conversations before December 1st on all of these areas. But like you say, taking that momentum and deciding what to prioritize, having those group conversations even past the time that this is published, I think will be important. And then sharing with local governmental units is something that we could definitely use our networks here in the room to help us get that out to local governmental units, since they do 80% of reviews. That would be really helpful as well. So we're still brainstorming on that.
Thank you, Kayla. Thanks for that question, Commissioner Kessler. And let's go to Commissioner Stroman.
Thank you, Chair Daubenberger, and thank you, Kayla. I want to agree. First of all, I want to preface this that it's possible I may have to run in the middle of my comment. So if I do, I apologize for that. I'm going to try to have it. I want to echo what Commissioner Kessler said about appreciating the extensive public input. I think that's really important, and I agree, like consistent with what we've laid out in our strategic plan and what we've prioritized as a board. I will also say that I think as we figure out what to do with that public input and what to do with the agencies, plural, voice around recommendations and what might be next, that some clear line will be important there. And I think in that, I really would encourage working with the tech reps to identify other agency experts who are dealing with a lot of these issues on a day-to-day basis. And part of the reason I say that in reviewing the comments, and this isn't to minimize the value of the comments, but I know, and I think one of them related to RV parks was even referenced, that is probably stemming from a specific project. I can tell several others that are stemming from specific projects or specific issues that, in my case, DNR is super immersed in right now, or has been for a number of years. And so I would just caution, like, before we call something an issue that requires further investigation, I think there is institutional knowledge and a broader set of knowledge from our practitioners around some of those issues that can help separate what is really a concern about a specific set of circumstances at a specific site in a specific project versus something that really may be a broader issue that EQB can address here. And I think without that lens and that conversation, we could easily confuse the two. And I think that wouldn't serve the environmental review process, very easily or very well. And so, again, like, I'm not diminishing the value. I think there's really important value here. I just think it is also important that we sort of vet what might be coming from kind of a unique set of circumstances versus what might be a more broadly applicable comment. Because I can start to see some, and if I can start to see some based on issues I've been involved with our staff, I just think there's another perspective that would really help round out the robustness of this report before we finalize those recommendations to the board. So appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, and I appreciate it. And we are going to figure out a way to continue meeting regularly with tech reps so that we can have those very important conversations. So we'll keep that in mind. So thank you.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like, the tech, it will be beyond the tech reps. Like, for us, Kate Fairman is wonderful. She's not the person that has day-to-day on the ground experience with trails or forestry or mining or, a number of those things. She can connect you with those folks, but I think it's some of the on the ground experience. And I've just listed the DNR ones. I know Commerce and PCA and others will have other experience. MnDOT. Kate can make those connections, but I think it is beyond agency tech reps too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Commissioner Stroman. Right. Any other comments or questions for Kayla? All right, hearing none. Kayla, thank you for the update, all your work on this. And I do also want to say I appreciate too when you were touching on all the engagement that was done this time around, much more than has been done before. And I think that's great. So thank you for that. Thank you for your continued work on this.
Thank you.
Right. Well, then that brings us to our last formative agenda item, which is the public comment time. So I'll go ahead and mention thank you for the reminder slide on the screen about comment procedure and guidelines for the public comment period. So please raise your hand in Teams if you'd like to comment.
Chair, we have one comment so far. Joy has raised her hand.
Great, go ahead, Joy.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Joy. I forgot to mention, please keep your comments to 2 minutes. If you would,
Yes, thank
please
you.
go right ahead.
Yes, this is Joy Anderson. I'm at Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, and I wanted to comment on the mandatory categories report. We have been so grateful for all the opportunity to give feedback that EQB has provided us. I think EQB has done a great job of providing a lot of opportunities and gathering a lot of public input. We really appreciate that. I do want to point out, though, that feedback in and of itself should not be a goal. I know the staff has done a lot of work on this. I know that lots of public members have put in a lot of effort into making sure their comments have been heard. And the goal should be to actually make changes based on that input. People, especially if they've been asked a bunch of times to put in their input, they really start to lose confidence in government and agencies if they don't see any results from that. There are so many great ideas that have been submitted to make environmental review more effective and useful, and to make it better protect Minnesota's environment. And we really hope to see those implemented. I wanted to express my hope that the mandatory categories analysis will have concrete recommendations about what changes should be made to improve environmental review and the mandatory categories, and plans for how to get to those results. It's really important, although it's a great first step to get that feedback, it's really important to turn that feedback into action. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy, for your comment. All right. Any other commenters today?
Chair, at this time, there aren't any other hands that are raised, but we can give it a minute, maybe.
Sounds good. We'll just pause and see if others put a hand up. I am not seeing any other hands up. Colleen, check with you, make sure you aren't either before we move on.
Chair, I am not seeing any hands either, so.
Great. Okay, well, thank you again, Joy. Thank you for your comment, and we will go ahead and then move on to the very last item of the agenda, which is closing and adjournment. So board members, thank you for your participation today. Very much appreciated. All the presenters, thank you for the information you shared. And so with that, we have officially reached the end of our agenda for today. So may I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move adjournment, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Stroman moves to adjourn. A second?
Member Katzenberger seconds.
Thank you, Member Katzenberger. All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Hearing no opposition, the motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you again, everyone. See you next month.